It started as a simple missing person report. A young mother, gone without a trace. No witnesses. No struggle. No sound. Just a locked apartment and silence. But what the cameras would later reveal was something far darker. In the dim glow of a security camera, a man was seen dragging a large heavy bag through the corridor of their apartment building. His face calm, his movements deliberate. Inside that bag lay the secret that would shatter two nations. Her name was Sheylla Cabrera, or as some knew her, Sheylla Gutierrez, a 33-year-old mother who had crossed oceans for a better life, only to meet her fate in the most chilling way imaginable. What began as a search for a missing wife would soon unravel into a web of lies, betrayal, and quiet horror, stretching from the suburbs of California to the prisons of Peru. This is her story. On ordinary mornings, the Cabrera home looked picture perfect. 3 small children tumbling through the hallway, cereal bowls clinking on the kitchen counter. Sheylla would hum softly as she tied shoelaces and packed lunches, her dark hair falling into her face. Across the table sat Josimar Cabrera Cornejo, her husband, quiet, neatly dressed, a man who seemed calm, measured, in control. To anyone looking in, they were another immigrant couple working hard for their place in America. Neighbors called them friendly and private. There were no loud fights, no police calls, no obvious cracks in the facade. But when Sheyella's friends back in Peru called her, they heard something in her voice that others didn't. A pause. A tremor she tried to hide behind laughter. Sometimes late at night, she'd whisper over the phone, "I'm tired. I can't do this anymore." Her friends thought she meant homesickness, the weight of motherhood in a foreign country, the ache of missing her family, but they didn't realize she was sending coded cries for help. Sheylla had begun to fear her husband. His temper, though subtle, was building. Arguments that started small, over bills, over jealousy, over silence, would stretch on for hours. And though he rarely raised his voice, his control felt suffocating. When she'd go out with friends, he'd call her repeatedly. When she talked to her mother too long, he'd question what they discussed. He didn't shout. He watched. And sometimes, watching can feel worse than shouting. Sheylla once confided to a cousin that she wanted to leave. She even looked at flights, a quick trip back to Lima, just to think, to breathe. But leaving isn't always simple when you have children, and when the person you fear sleeps beside you every night. August 12, 2025 began like any other day, or so everyone thought. By evening, Sheyella's phone went silent. No calls, no messages, no updates on her social pages. She always checked in with her mother. Always. So when hours turned to days, panic began to spread through her family back home. At first, they told themselves she was busy. 3 kids could keep anyone occupied. But by the 3rd day, worry hardened into dread. Her relatives began reaching out to friends in California. No one had seen her. The apartment complex manager said the family seemed fine the week before, but now, only the husband was seen coming and going. Her mother, trembling, made the official missing person report. When police arrived at the Cabrera apartment, Josimar opened the door calmly. He said Sheylla had left suddenly. No emotion, no confusion, just a vague story about her needing space. Inside, the apartment looked unnaturally spotless. No toys on the floor. No dishes in the sink. And there was a faint, chemical smell lingering in the air, bleach. One officer would later recall that something about the silence in that house didn't feel right. The walls felt too clean, the air too still, as if it were trying to hide what had happened inside. Investigators searched, but there were no signs of struggle, no blood, no forced entry. Only absence. And sometimes, absence screams louder than evidence. A detective named Renee Garcia took lead on the case. She'd seen her share of disappearances, some voluntary, some tragic, but this one lingered in her mind. Something about the husband's demeanor, that eerie calm. The first major break came from surveillance footage pulled from the apartment complex cameras. It was grainy, time-stamped a few nights before the missing person report was filed. On the screen, under the dim corridor light, Josimar appeared, dragging something heavy down the hall. It was long, wrapped in dark fabric, and his movements were slow, strained. He stopped once, adjusted the weight, then continued toward the parking lot. The footage showed him loading it into the trunk of a vehicle. He looked around only once, a quick, sharp glance, then drove off into the darkness. Detectives replayed the clip again and again, hoping the object wasn't what they feared. But in the pit of their stomachs, they already knew. When officers confronted Josimar about the footage, he claimed it was trash. Old things he'd meant to throw away. His tone was even rehearsed. But the detectives noticed the small tremor in his hand as he reached for his water. A search warrant was issued for his car. Inside, beneath the lining of the trunk, investigators found traces of blood, faint, but enough. DNA tests later confirmed it belonged to Sheylla Cabrera. The investigation now turned into a homicide inquiry, and Josimar, the calm, quiet husband, became the prime suspect. Using GPS data from Josimar's phone, detectives traced a route he'd taken the night the footage was captured. It led north, winding through the mountains, to a desolate stretch of the Angeles National Forest. The road was rough, the kind of place people rarely visit at night. Dense pines swallowed the moonlight, and the air hung heavy with mist. For days, search teams combed through the forest, guided by faint digital breadcrumbs, cell tower pings, vehicle tracking, small inconsistencies in his timeline. Then, amid the thick brush near a dry ravine, they found what they'd feared. The remains were scattered, partially buried beneath leaves and stone. Animals had disturbed the area, but enough was there to identify Sheylla Cabrera. The forest, vast and silent, had held her secret for days, and now it whispered it back. When detectives brought Josimar in for questioning again, he barely spoke. He denied everything, said she'd gone back to Peru, said the footage was taken out of context. But the evidence, though circumstantial, was stacking against him. He was arrested and charged with murder. Yet even in custody, he maintained his eerie composure. No tears, no outrage, just silence. Back in Peru, Sheyella's family learned of her death through a phone call that shattered their world. Her mother collapsed when she heard the words. Her friends couldn't comprehend how the woman who had once spoken of hope and home was now gone, reduced to a name in a police file. The case against Josimar was strong but complicated. California prosecutors faced jurisdictional challenges, evidence gaps, international ties, the logistics of a transnational suspect. And as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered whispers of Josimar's past, allegations of control, jealousy, manipulation, things that had gone unreported for years. But before the trial could begin, Josimar fled. Reports say he returned to Peru under the guise of visiting relatives. When U.S. authorities issued an extradition request, Peruvian law enforcement located him in a small town outside Lima. He was detained, but even then his face betrayed no emotion. He told investigators he loved his wife, and that everything was a misunderstanding. Yet when asked what really happened that night in August, he stared at the wall and said nothing. Months passed. The media picked up fragments of the story. A Peruvian woman missing in California, her husband detained overseas. But then, as other headlines came and went, Sheyella's name began to fade from public memory. For her family, though, the silence only grew heavier. They didn't have a proper burial, no grave to visit, only ashes and unanswered questions. Her children, now living with relatives, ask sometimes where their mother is. The adults exchange glances, unsure how to answer. How do you tell a child that the person they trusted most may have been responsible for their greatest loss? Detective Garcia still keeps a file on her desk labeled Cabrera Case. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she opens it. Not because there's new evidence, but because some cases never leave you. She remembers standing in that apartment. The faint smell of bleach, the toys perfectly lined up, and the silence that seemed to hum through the walls. The Angeles National Forest remains vast and indifferent. Hikers pass through without knowing that somewhere among those trees, a young mother's final chapter was written. Nature has a way of erasing traces. of reclaiming what humans try to hide. And maybe that's why Sheyella's story lingers, not in the evidence left behind, but in what was taken away. No one will ever truly know what happened in those final moments. Whether she begged, whether she fought, whether she realized she'd never see her children again. The only witness left is the forest, and the silence it keeps. As for Josimar Cabrera Cornejo, he remains behind bars in Peru, awaiting the slow wheels of justice. But justice, in cases like these, often feels hollow. It cannot bring back laughter in the morning kitchen, or the sound of a mother calling her children's names. In the end, Sheylla Cabrera's story isn't just about one woman's disappearance. It's about how love can curdle into control, how fear can hide behind quiet smiles, and how sometimes, the most haunting crimes begin in the calmest of homes. This is the story of Sheylla Cabrera, a mother, a daughter, a friend, who vanished into silence, and whose echoes still linger in the pines of the Angeles forest. Minds of murderers. Because behind every quiet face, there's a story waiting to be heard. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. In the U.S., contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You're not alone.